Did you know that the month you were born holds a secret far deeper than astrology or the sparkle of birthstones? Imagine a force of nature intertwined with your very soul, an animal spirit linked to your birth month, embodying your unique strengths and revealing hidden challenges. Rooted in ancient wisdom, this journey goes beyond folklore. It offers a powerful lens to transform how you see yourself and the world. In this video, you'll uncover your spirit animal and discover how its influence can shape your path, offer protection, and guide your choices in ways you may never have imagined. Get ready to step into a new realm of self-awareness and empowerment. If this resonates with you, support our journey by liking, sharing, and commenting with the affirmation, "I accept the power of my spirit animal." Your engagement helps build a community centered on self-discovery and personal growth. Now, let's begin our journey to unveil the spirit animal within you. Spirit animals have captivated human imagination and spirituality for centuries, symbolizing wisdom, strength, and guidance across cultures. But have you ever felt a connection to a particular animal that seems to guide you through life's challenges or offers subtle signs in times of need? Your spirit animal might hold deeper meaning than you realize. In many Native American cultures, spirit animals, often called totem animals, act as lifelong guides and protectors, revealed through visions, dreams, and sacred rituals. Imagine facing a daunting challenge. By channeling the bear's strength, you can find unparalleled courage and resilience. The eagle, soaring with a commanding view of the world, represents the pursuit of higher truths and the wisdom to see life from a broader perspective. Far more than mere symbols, these spirit animals embody energies that offer protection, guidance, and a sense of community deeply rooted in nature. In Celtic traditions, animals hold deep spiritual significance, often serving as powerful guides and messengers. The stag symbolizes leadership and the pursuit of wisdom, connecting seekers with higher spiritual realms. In contrast, the mysterious raven guides individuals through transformations and profound life changes. Have you ever stood at a crossroads and felt unsure of which path to take? Spirit animals like these offer insights and warnings, acting as bridges between the human and divine worlds to help navigate life's complexities. In Buddhism, spirit animals are living energies that reflect our spiritual strengths and challenges. They offer guidance along the path to enlightenment, providing insight and protection during times of need. A tiger symbolizes fierce determination and bravery, while a deer embodies gentleness and compassion, urging us to find balance within ourselves. By contemplating these animals, practitioners gain a deeper understanding of their true nature and areas where personal growth is needed. In today's world, spirit animals are experiencing a resurgence, resonating with people seeking greater self-awareness and spiritual growth. Meditating on the qualities of a spirit animal or integrating its lessons into daily life can provide clarity, strength, and a renewed sense of purpose. Which animal's wisdom calls out to you and offers guidance in your journey? For those born in January, the wolf emerges as a powerful spirit animal, symbolizing loyalty, leadership, and a profound sense of community. Across cultures, wolves are revered for their loyalty, strength, and strong pack bonds, embodying both independence and unity. Have you ever felt torn between standing strong alone and relying on your community for support? The wolf teaches that both independence and connection can coexist in harmony, just as wolves find strength in their pack. Those guided by the wolf spirit cherish their connections while learning to nurture their own well-being. January-born individuals are natural leaders, driven to protect and uplift those they care about. However, this deep commitment can lead to stress and burnout if not balanced with moments of self-reflection and care. In Buddhist tradition, the wolf represents more than a mere metaphor. It serves as a spiritual guardian teaching balance, It reflects the need for independence while emphasizing the resilience found in mutual support. Spending time in quiet reflection, much like a wolf retreating into solitude, can renew one's energy and clarity, whether through meditation or moments in nature. This practice helps balance their natural instincts with their responsibilities. Enhanced connection and practicality. Those guided by the wolf spirit often possess strong intuition and emotional depth, making them compassionate leaders. By connecting with the wolf through reflective practices, individuals can deepen their understanding of their instincts and enhance their ability to lead and support others. As we leave behind the wisdom of the wolf, a new spirit emerges to guide February-borns with nocturnal insight. Enter the owl, steeped in mystery and knowledge, ready to share its hidden wisdom. For those born in February, the owl stands as a powerful spirit animal, representing wisdom, intuition, and the ability to perceive hidden truths. Renowned for its nocturnal vision and ability to see through the darkness, the owl symbolizes clarity in the midst of life's complexities. Have you ever noticed details others overlook or felt compelled to uncover deeper meanings? This heightened awareness is a defining trait of many February-born individuals, who excel at reading between the lines and discerning subtle shifts. The owl has been revered across many cultures as a symbol of wisdom, mystery, and profound insight. In ancient Greece, it was the sacred companion of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, symbolizing not only intellectual insight but also keen judgment. In indigenous traditions, the owl is often seen as a messenger of hidden truths and a protector against unseen forces. This dual role, both guide and sentinel, reflects the complex nature of February-born individuals, who balance sharp intellect with deep intuition, making them trusted advisors and insightful observers. In Buddhist teachings, the owl embodies the balance between knowledge and intuition, guiding seekers on their path to self-realization. It represents spiritual insight, helping individuals look beyond surface appearances to connect with deeper truths. Those guided by the owl often pursue higher understanding, delving into philosophical and spiritual exploration to uncover their true purpose and grasp the essence of existence. Practical influence on daily life. Those guided by the owl's energy often thrive in roles that require keen observation, discretion, and thoughtful decision-making. Their introspective nature allows them to perceive patterns and insights that others may miss. However, this depth of perception can sometimes become overwhelming. Striking a balance between deep reflection and active engagement with the world is crucial for their emotional well-being and personal fulfillment. Spend a few moments each day in silence and focused breathing to clear your mind and sharpen your intuitive abilities. This practice can help you find clarity amidst the noise of daily life. Maintain a journal to record your thoughts, dreams, and intuitive insights. Writing can help you better understand complex emotions and uncover hidden patterns in your experiences. Dive into philosophical, spiritual, or esoteric teachings that align with themes of wisdom and introspection, strengthening your connection to the owl's guiding energy. In a fast-paced world that often prioritizes surface-level observations and quick decisions, those guided by the owl bring a refreshing depth of perception and thoughtful insight. Their ability to see what others miss and offer wisdom-filled guidance makes them invaluable in personal and professional circles. While the owl guides February-borns with profound wisdom, March brings forth a radiant and lively spirit ready to uplift and inspire. For those born in March, the dolphin serves as a vibrant spirit animal, embodying joy, empathy, and the power of connection. Renowned for their playful and sociable nature, dolphins symbolize unity and emotional intelligence. Do you often uplift those around you or bring harmony to groups? If so, you may deeply connect with the dolphin's energy, radiating positivity and fostering meaningful bonds. Throughout many cultural traditions, dolphins are revered as symbols of protection, wisdom, and good fortune. In ancient Greek mythology, they were seen as sacred messengers guiding sailors and bestowing blessings. Indigenous cultures often view dolphins as guardians of the sea, offering protection to travelers and strengthening bonds with the natural world. In Buddhism, the dolphin symbolizes purity, unity, and heartfelt communication, encouraging us to live with open hearts and find joy in life's simple moments. Those guided by the dolphin spirit often exhibit deep empathy and a natural ability to understand the emotions and needs of those around them. This makes them excellent listeners, compassionate friends, and skilled mediators. Their emotional intelligence and communication skills enable them to create lasting bonds and resolve conflicts with ease. In both personal and professional settings, they foster unity, mutual respect, and a spirit of togetherness, balancing emotional connections, while their compassion and empathy are powerful strengths. March-born individuals must be mindful of setting healthy boundaries to avoid emotional exhaustion. Prioritizing self-care, moments of reflection, and time spent in solitude helps them maintain their energy and continue uplifting those around them. Practice deep, rhythmic breathing inspired by the dolphin's graceful movement through water. This can help calm your mind, relieve stress, and enhance emotional clarity. Embrace your playful and creative energy through activities such as painting, dance, or writing. These pursuits bring joy, freedom, and a deeper connection to your true self. Engage in open-hearted, empathetic conversations. By truly listening and understanding diverse perspectives, you can build genuine and meaningful connections. In a world that often craves genuine empathy and meaningful connection, those guided by the dolphin spirit stand as beacons of compassion and unity. Their ability to uplift and connect brings harmony and understanding to every circle they touch, making their presence invaluable. While the dolphin's playful energy uplifts and connects, our journey continues as we soar into April, guided by the keen-eyed and determined hawk. For those born in April, the hawk stands as a guiding spirit animal, embodying vision, determination, and leadership. Revered for its keen sight and soaring flight, the hawk inspires us to see the bigger picture and tackle life's challenges with clarity and precision. Do you often feel compelled to seize new opportunities or rise above everyday obstacles? This keen awareness and ambition characterize many born in April. Throughout history, the hawk has been revered as a messenger and guide. In Native American traditions, it is seen as a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, offering insight and perspective from above. In ancient Egypt, the hawk was associated with the sky god Horus, embodying divine power and far-reaching vision. This rich symbolism highlights the hawk's role in providing clarity, courage, and the ability to lead with foresight. Guided by the hawk spirit, April-born individuals often exhibit strong willpower, independence, and a clear sense of purpose. They are natural leaders, capable of making quick, decisive choices even under pressure. However, their fierce independence can sometimes lead to isolation or a tendency to shoulder too much on their own. Finding a balance between their drive and collaboration is essential to reaching their full potential. Personal impact. Individuals guided by the hawk often thrive in roles that demand strategic thinking, vision, and determination. Careers in business, leadership, politics, or creative fields may resonate deeply with their skill set. Their passion and ability to inspire others is undeniable, though they must be cautious not to become overwhelmed by their own high expectations and responsibilities. The hawk reminds us that true leadership arises from vision and the courage to guide others toward a brighter future. By rising above challenges with clarity and grace, those guided by this spirit can inspire and uplift those around them. While the hawk's energy empowers with clarity and determination, It can sometimes lead to impatience or overzealousness. Learning to balance their drive with moments of reflection and collaboration ensures that their leadership is both effective and sustainable. Take a few moments to visualize yourself soaring high above life's challenges, gaining a fresh perspective on your goals and obstacles. Reflect on your long-term aspirations and break them down into manageable steps. This practice can bring clarity and reduce feelings of overwhelm. Spend time outdoors, observing birds in flight. Let their grace and focus inspire you to channel your energy with determination. In today's fast-paced world, those guided by the hawk offer a refreshing blend of vision, courage, and strategic leadership. Their ability to see beyond immediate challenges and inspire change makes them invaluable leaders. With the hawk's clear vision and purposeful drive guiding us, we now journey into May, where the spirit of the horse embodies boundless energy and a thirst for freedom. For those born in May, the horse emerges as their guiding spirit animal, embodying freedom, strength, and boundless energy. Renowned for their power and unrelenting drive, horses inspire us to break boundaries, explore new horizons, and pursue personal growth. Do you feel an unyielding desire to express yourself freely and explore life's vast possibilities? This passionate energy often defines those born in May, driving them to thrive when unburdened by limitations. The horse has long been revered across cultures as a symbol of nobility, resilience, and untamed spirit. In Native American traditions, horses represent strength, stamina, and spiritual journeys, urging individuals to pursue their goals with courage. In ancient Greek mythology, horses were often connected with divine forces, serving as a bridge between the mortal and spiritual realms. This enduring symbolism highlights the horse's role as a guide for overcoming life's challenges with grace and determination. Guided by the horse spirit, May-born individuals often demonstrate unwavering determination, independence, and a love for adventure. Highly motivated, they possess remarkable physical and mental endurance, allowing them to seize opportunities and inspire those around them. However, their thirst for freedom can sometimes result in restlessness or resistance to routine and constraints. The horse's influence drives May-born individuals to passionately pursue their dreams and express themselves authentically. They often excel in roles that demand adaptability, creativity, and high energy, while their independent spirit propels them forward. Balancing their desire for freedom with meaningful commitments is essential for long-term success. By channeling their drive with patience and a grounded approach, they can transform their ambitions into lasting achievements. Much like a horse galloping with purpose, those guided by this spirit radiate energy and inspire those around them. True strength, however, lies in balancing their quest for freedom with dedication and meaningful connections. The strong drive for independence can sometimes make commitments feel confining or lead to a sense of entrapment. Cultivating patience, collaborating with others, and aligning their ambitions with stability can help them thrive while maintaining their sense of freedom. Engage in activities such as running, cycling, dancing, or any form of exercise that channels the horse's dynamic energy, promoting both physical and mental rejuvenation. Dedicate time to pursuits like art, music, writing, or travel that allow for personal expression and exploration of new horizons. Practice meditation or journaling to align your drive with clear intentions and maintain focus on your long-term goals. In today's ever-changing world, May-born individuals guided by the horse embody resilience and boundless passion. Their ability to break barriers and inspire change makes them catalysts for innovation and growth. With the horse's untamed energy propelling us forward, we now step into June, guided by the grace, intuition, and gentle spirit of the deer. For those born in June, The deer serves as a guiding spirit animal, symbolizing gentleness, intuition, and a deep connection to life's subtleties. Graceful and perceptive, the deer mirrors the qualities of June-born individuals who navigate life's complexities with compassion and care. Much like a deer moving quietly through the forest, they can sense shifts in their surroundings and respond with empathy and understanding. Across various cultures, the deer is celebrated as a symbol of gentleness, spiritual awareness, and a profound connection to nature. In Native American traditions, it embodies sensitivity, intuition, and the gift of deep listening. Celtic mythology associates the deer with sacred forests and the pursuit of spiritual wisdom. The deer's graceful presence reminds us to tread softly through life, remaining attuned to our surroundings and the energies around us. Those guided by the deer spirit often exhibit compassion, perceptiveness, and deep empathy. They intuitively sense the needs of those around them, responding with warmth and kindness, which makes them exceptional caregivers, healers, and friends. Their intuitive insight allows them to perceive layers of meaning that others may overlook, forging meaningful connections. However, their heightened sensitivity can also lead to emotional overwhelm, highlighting the importance of solitude and self-care to maintain balance. The deer's gentle guidance encourages June-born individuals to lead with empathy and embrace their nurturing instincts. They often find fulfillment in roles that involve healing, teaching, or fostering harmony, whether in their families, careers, or communities. While their compassion is a tremendous strength, it's essential for them to protect their own energy by setting healthy boundaries to avoid emotional fatigue or burnout. Like a deer pausing to listen to the rustle of leaves, those guided by the spirit animal are deeply attuned to the whispers of intuition and emotion. They find strength in gentleness and clarity in moments of stillness. For those guided by the deer, a key challenge is finding balance between their deep empathy and the need for self-protection. Their inclination to prioritize others can lead to emotional fatigue. Cultivating self-awareness and establishing healthy boundaries allows them to continue offering their gifts of compassion without compromising their own well-being. Practical ways to connect with the deer spirit. Spend quiet moments in forests, parks, or gardens, practicing walking meditations or simply absorbing the beauty around you. This helps ground your energy and deepen your connection to the deer's gentle spirit. Engage in activities like yoga, tai chi, or dance that promote grace, fluidity, and balance in both body and mind. Maintain a journal to reflect on your thoughts, dreams, and intuitions. This practice can clarify your feelings and strengthen your connection to your inner guidance. In a fast-paced and often disconnected world, those guided by the deer offer a much-needed touch of gentleness and mindful awareness. Their ability to create peace and foster empathy makes them invaluable both personally and professionally. With the deer's graceful presence leading the way, we move into July, where the protective and resilient spirit of the crab awaits. For those born in July, the crab serves as a powerful spirit animal, symbolizing protection, resilience, and a deep connection to emotions and roots. With its hard outer shell protecting a soft, vulnerable interior, the crab teaches the importance of maintaining strong boundaries while staying deeply connected to loved ones and oneself. Much like how the crab carries its home wherever it goes, July-born individuals find strength and security through loyalty, family, and a profound sense of belonging. Across different traditions, the crab is revered as a symbol of adaptability, self-protection, and heightened sensitivity. In many coastal cultures, it serves as a guardian of the shores, embodying resilience amid turbulent waters and the capacity to navigate changing tides. Astrologically linked to the Zodiac sign Cancer, the crab reflects nurturing, protective, and emotionally intuitive qualities. This deep-rooted connection to emotions and heritage makes it a powerful guide for managing life's complexities with grace and resilience. Those guided by the crab spirit are often characterized by strong loyalty, dedication, and a nurturing presence. Natural protectors. They offer steadfast support to their loved ones. However, their protective instincts can sometimes lead them to retreat inward when confronted with stress or perceived threats. For crab-guided individuals, the challenge lies in balancing openness with self-protection, knowing when to shield themselves and when to let others in. The crab spirit encourages July-born individuals to prioritize their emotional well-being and the security of those they cherish. Fulfillment often stems from nurturing protective roles, whether within family and friendships or in professions like healthcare, counseling, or community service. While their empathy and devotion are powerful strengths, maintaining clear boundaries is essential to prevent emotional fatigue and ensure they can continue offering support without depleting themselves. Much like a crab skillfully navigating obstacles, those guided by this spirit find strength in adaptability and resilience by staying true to their core values. Balancing the need for security with openness to change and vulnerability is a core challenge for crab-guided individuals. Their instinct to retreat inward can at times hinder personal growth or limit new experiences. By cultivating trust and gradually stepping outside their comfort zones, they can continue to grow while preserving their protective instincts. Practical ways to connect with the crab spirit. Visualize a protective shield of positive energy around yourself during meditation. This practice safeguards your emotions while allowing meaningful connections with others. Nurture your connection to your roots by investing time in home-based activities such as cooking, gardening, or creative projects that bring comfort and a sense of security. Take time to regularly reflect on your emotional needs and establish healthy boundaries, ensuring a balanced flow of giving and receiving support. In a world marked by rapid change, those guided by the crab offer stability, genuine care, and safe spaces for others. Their nurturing presence and resilience make them invaluable, especially during times of uncertainty and transformation. As the crab's protective embrace offers strength and stability, we move forward to August, where the mighty lion brings courage, leadership, and a regal spirit. For those born in August, the lion serves as their guiding spirit animal, representing courage, power, and leadership. As the king of the jungle, the lion commands respect with its regal presence and protective instincts. August-born individuals naturally resonate with these traits, exuding confidence and inspiring those around them through their determination to achieve goals and drive meaningful change. Across cultures, the lion has long symbolized royalty, strength, and justice. In ancient Egypt, lions were revered as protectors and were closely associated with the sun god Ra, embodying power and enlightenment. In Hinduism, the lion is linked to the goddess Durga, symbolizing bravery and triumph over challenges. This cultural reverence emphasizes the lion's role as a protector and leader, resonating deeply with August-born individuals. Those guided by the lion spirit often exude self-confidence, courage, and a strong desire to lead with integrity. They naturally attract and inspire others, making them effective leaders and protectors. Their passion and determination are contagious, but they must temper their strong-willed nature with humility and compassion to avoid appearing overly dominant or inflexible. The influence of the lion encourages August-born individuals to lead with strength and compassion. They excel in roles that allow them to make a positive impact, such as leadership positions, advocacy, or creative endeavors. While their confidence often drives them to success, true leadership also requires uplifting others and practicing empathetic listening. Just as the lion's roar commands attention, those guided by the spirit lead with both strength and grace. True courage lies not only in wielding power but in showing compassion and lifting others up. A significant challenge for lion-guided individuals is managing pride and overconfidence. While self-assurance is a strength, it can sometimes lead to dismissing others' perspectives or becoming overly focused on personal goals. Practicing humility and embracing collaboration can enhance their leadership and make them even more effective and inspiring. Practical ways to connect with the lion spirit. Engage in activities that build leadership skills and self-awareness, such as public speaking courses, workshops, or taking on leadership roles in community or professional settings. Dedicate time to reflect on your goals and the impact you have on others. Journaling or meditating on themes of strength and compassion can help you channel your energy wisely. Use your influence to support and uplift others through community service, mentoring, or acts of kindness. This embodies the lion's protective and generous nature, in a world that requires both boldness and compassionate leadership. August-born individuals guided by the lion serve as symbols of strength, courage, and generosity. Their ability to lead with integrity and inspire others makes them powerful agents of positive change. As the lion's powerful roar echoes with strength and leadership, we turn to September, where the wisdom and keen perception of the owl guide those born under this reflective spirit. For those born in September, the owl stands as their guiding spirit animal, representing wisdom, intuition, and the power to see beyond the surface. With its keen nocturnal vision and penetrating gaze, the owl embodies clarity in darkness and a profound understanding of life's mysteries. September-born individuals often resonate deeply with these traits, possessing a natural ability to perceive hidden truths and offer insights where others may only see uncertainty. Throughout history, the owl has been revered as a symbol of wisdom, mystery, and spiritual insight. In ancient Greece, it was closely associated with Athena, the goddess of wisdom, symbolizing knowledge and foresight. In Native American traditions, the owl is considered a keeper of sacred wisdom and a guide through the spiritual realm. This enduring cultural reverence underscores the owl's role as a guardian of hidden truths and a beacon for seekers of deeper understanding. Those guided by the owl spirit often display introspection, deep perception, and a drive to uncover hidden truths. They naturally seek solitude to find clarity amid life's noise, making them discerning judges of character and trusted advisors. However, their inclination toward deep reflection can sometimes make them seem aloof or distant if they become too absorbed in their thoughts. The owl's guidance inspires September-born individuals to pursue knowledge that deepens their understanding of themselves and their environment. They often thrive in roles that demand keen insight, thoughtful judgment, and careful analysis, such as counseling, teaching, research, or spiritual guidance. While their perceptiveness is a tremendous asset, they must balance introspection with active engagement to maintain meaningful connections and avoid isolation. Just as the owl's gaze pierces through darkness, those guided by its spirit illuminate hidden truths, blending deep reflection with purposeful action. Those guided by the owl may sometimes struggle with overthinking or hesitation, which can impede decisive action. By trusting their intuition and balancing reflection with timely action, they can transform their insights into impactful contributions. Practical ways to connect with the owl spirit. Dedicate time to meditation focused on enhancing clarity and intuition, deepening your connection with your inner wisdom. Maintain a journal to document your thoughts, dreams, and experiences, allowing hidden patterns and insights to emerge. Engage with philosophical texts, spiritual teachings, or esoteric studies that resonate with you, broadening your understanding and honing your intuitive gifts. In today's fast-paced world that often favors surface judgments, those guided by the owl offer a refreshing depth of perception and thoughtful insight. Their ability to see beyond the obvious and share wisdom makes them invaluable guides in both personal and professional settings. While the owl brings light to hidden truths with quiet wisdom, October ushers in the transformative and mysterious energy of the raven. For those born in October, the raven stands as their guiding spirit animal, representing transformation, intelligence, and mystery. Revered for its connection to cycles of change and rebirth, the raven embodies adaptability and sharp intellect, guiding October-born individuals to navigate life's complexities with curiosity and deep insight. These individuals often embrace transformation and seek truths hidden beneath the surface, drawing strength from life's mysteries. Throughout various cultures, the raven is seen as a mystical symbol of life, death, and rebirth. In Celtic mythology, it is closely associated with the goddess Morrigan, representing transformation and foresight. In Native American traditions, the raven serves as both a trickster and a guide, helping people navigate transitions and uncover hidden layers of reality. This rich symbolism underscores the raven's role as a guide for those who seek deeper truths and the courage to embrace change. Those guided by the raven often demonstrate intelligence, curiosity, and a readiness to embrace transformation. As introspective thinkers, they delve into life's deeper mysteries and frequently perceive connections that others overlook. This keen perception makes them adept problem solvers and seekers of hidden truths. However, their focus on uncovering life's mysteries can sometimes lead to a sense of detachment from everyday concerns. The influence of the raven encourages October-born individuals to embrace change and explore new perspectives. They often thrive in roles that require creativity, deep analysis, and innovative thinking, such as art, philosophy, science, or personal development. Their pursuit of transformation can inspire and guide others, but they must stay grounded to avoid becoming too isolated in their introspection. Much like the raven flying between worlds, those guided by this spirit possess a unique ability to navigate life's mysteries, using change as a powerful catalyst for personal growth. Challenges and growth opportunities, balancing a transformative nature with practical action is essential for those guided by the raven. While introspection and a desire for depth are strengths, they must also learn to act decisively to bring their insights to life. By trusting their intuition and engaging with the world, they can create meaningful and lasting change. Practical ways to connect with the raven spirit. Engage in meditations focused on releasing the past and welcoming new beginnings. Visualization practices can help align your energy with transformation and growth. Channel your transformative energy through artistic projects or hobbies that explore themes of change, mystery, and self-discovery. Dive into philosophical, spiritual, or mystical teachings that resonate with your desire for deeper understanding and personal transformation. In a world that often clings to stability, those guided by the raven bring a unique and refreshing perspective, embracing complexity and transformation. Their intelligence and openness to change make them influential leaders and guides during periods of uncertainty. As the raven's transformative energy lingers, November introduces a powerful symbol of renewal and wisdom, the serpent. For those born in November, the serpent emerges as their guiding spirit animal, embodying transformation, renewal, and the pursuit of hidden wisdom. Known for shedding its skin, the serpent symbolizes cycles of death and rebirth that define life's journey. November-born individuals resonate deeply with this energy, adapting and evolving through life's challenges while seeking to uncover hidden truths within themselves and the world around them. The serpent occupies a profound and complex place in cultural and spiritual traditions, often symbolizing transformation and hidden wisdom. In Hinduism, the coiled Kundalini serpent represents spiritual awakening, rising through the chakras to bring enlightenment. In Mesoamerican mythology, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, embodies life, death, and renewal. This rich symbolism highlights the serpent's role as a powerful guide for spiritual growth, healing, and transformation. Those guided by the serpent are known for their introspection, intuition, and adaptability. They are naturally drawn to exploring life's mysteries and delving into their own inner depths, often experiencing intense periods of personal growth and transformation. While this quest for renewal brings wisdom and insight, it can sometimes make them appear distant or secretive if they become too engrossed in their journey. The serpent encourages November-born individuals to see change as an essential path to growth. They excel in roles that emphasize deep thinking, healing, and transformation, such as psychology, counseling, research, or creative endeavors. Their sensitivity to subtle energies and keen perception enable them to provide profound guidance to others. However, it's important for them to find moments of grounding to balance their continuous cycles of change and prevent emotional fatigue. Just as the serpent sheds its skin, those guided by its spirit are in a constant state of evolution, embracing renewal as a pathway to deeper wisdom. Balancing stability with transformation is a central challenge for those guided by the serpent. While their drive for growth is a strength, it can also lead to upheaval and instability. By cultivating patience and grounding their transformative experiences, they can integrate change into lasting wisdom. Practical ways to connect with the serpent spirit. Engage in meditation practices focused on releasing old patterns and embracing new beginnings. Kundalini yoga or breathwork can awaken inner energy, aligning with the serpent's transformative power. Dedicate a journal to tracking your personal growth. Reflect on your challenges and breakthroughs to better understand and integrate transformative experiences. Dive into practices like energy healing, shadow work, or esoteric studies to deepen your connection to the serpent's wisdom and facilitate personal renewal. In a world often resistant to change, those guided by the serpent remind us of the power of transformation and renewal. Their courage to embrace the unknown and evolve inspires others to confront challenges and grow beyond their limitations. As the serpent sheds its old skin to transform, December brings forth a spirit known for its grace, intuition, and gentleness, the nurturing energy of the doe. For those born in December, the doe emerges as their guiding spirit animal, symbolizing gentleness, intuition, and a free-spirited nature. Renowned for its grace and ability to move with lightness, the doe inspires December-born individuals to approach life with compassion and sensitivity. Their connection with the doe reflects a unique balance of empathy and quiet strength, helping them uncover beauty even in challenging moments. Across diverse cultures, the doe is revered as a symbol of peace, intuition, and natural harmony. In Celtic lore, deer are seen as guides bridging the spiritual and physical realms, leading seekers toward enlightenment. In Native American traditions, the doe embodies gentleness, adaptability, and grace in facing life's challenges. This symbolism highlights the doe's nurturing and intuitive nature, offering both protection and inspiration to those who follow its path. December-born individuals guided by the doe often radiate empathy, sensitivity, and a deep connection to their emotions and intuition. Their gentle demeanor makes them approachable and comforting, while an inner resilience enables them to gracefully navigate challenges. Their intuitive nature often draws them to spiritual and creative pursuits, fostering meaningful connections and avenues for self-expression. The doe guides December-borns to lead with compassion and cultivate peace within themselves and their surroundings. They often excel in roles centered on caregiving, teaching, or creating environments of healing and beauty, while their deep empathy allows them to connect meaningfully with others. Maintaining healthy boundaries is crucial to prevent emotional exhaustion and preserve their well-being. Much like the doe moving gracefully through the forest, those guided by this spirit bring lightness and compassion to every step. Their journey calls for embracing both their gentleness and inner strength to create harmony within themselves and the world around them. One of the primary challenges for Do-guided individuals is learning to protect their energy while maintaining their compassionate spirit. Their desire to support others can sometimes lead to emotional fatigue. By prioritizing self-care and establishing clear boundaries, they can continue sharing their gifts without becoming overwhelmed. Practical ways to connect with the Do spirit. Reconnect with the Do's energy by spending time in natural settings. Meditative walks through forests or gardens can help ground your spirit and bring tranquility. Explore artistic pursuits like painting, writing, music, or dance, channeling your sensitivity and intuition into beautiful and healing expressions. Dedicate time to acts of kindness and service, supporting those in need and creating peaceful spaces in your daily life. These practices align closely with the nurturing energy of the Do. In today's fast-paced and often disconnected world, December-born individuals guided by the Do serve as reminders of the transformative power of compassion, gentleness, and intuitive connection. Their ability to create harmony and offer genuine empathy enriches the lives of those around them. As the gentle spirit of the Do graces our journey with peace and compassion, we conclude our exploration of the spirit animals of the year. Each month's guide offers profound lessons, reminding us that connecting with these energies is a lifelong path of self-discovery and growth. As we wrap up this journey through the spirit animals and their unique connections to each birth month, take a moment to reflect on how these guiding energies are already present in your life. Each of us carries strengths, faces challenges, and walks paths illuminated by our spirit animal. This awareness can lead to profound self-discovery and transformation. Ask yourself, how does your spirit animal influence your choices, guide your actions, or help you navigate life's complexities? Consider exploring this connection through journaling, meditation, or joining communities that share in this journey of growth and understanding. Discovering your spirit animal isn't merely an insight, it's an invitation to deepen your understanding of yourself and your connection with the world. Embracing this wisdom empowers you to create meaningful change and align your life with energies that resonate deeply. We encourage you to continue this exploration with us if this journey resonated with you. Like the video, subscribe for more content on spiritual growth and self-awareness, and share your spirit animal or experiences in the comments below. Together, we can nurture a community of support and shared learning. Take a deep breath and say, I honor the strength, wisdom, and guidance of my spirit animal and walk my path with authenticity and purpose. Let this affirmation ground you and invite the transformative energy within. Thank you for joining us today. We're honored to be part of your journey. Until next time, we send blessings of courage, wisdom, and positive energy. May your spirit animal continue to inspire and empower you every day. See you in the next video, and may you continue to walk your path with grace and strength.